interesting discussion. Without further delay, I would like to call upon our for our closing ceremony. Thank you. So may I have the pleasure of calling upon our esteemed and distinguished guest for this closing ceremony, our keynote speaker, Neloufer from Sri Lanka. Then the chief guest of the closing ceremony, Asma, Jahangir Sahiba. Vice-Chancellor of Quaid-i-Azam University, Dr. Jahangir. And Director of Center of Excellence in Gender Studies, Quaid-i-Azam University, Dr. Farzana Bari. I would also like to invite Arifa Khalid, our guest, on stage. He is member of Parliament. So without having further delay, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for this closing ceremony, Professor Neloufer. She is a senior professor and head of Department of English at the University of Colombo, Sri Lanka. She is the author of Militarizing Sri Lanka, Popular Culture, Memory and Narrative in the Armed Conflict, Women and the Nation's Narrative, Gender and Nationalism in 20th Century Sri Lanka, and several book chapters and journal articles that bring together multidisciplinary perspectives on society, security and culture, feminism, literature, film, disabilities, and performance art. She was a member of the jury of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize in 2008 and the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature in 2015, and has served on several juries at film and theatre festivals. She holds a PhD degree from the University of Kent and held several distinguished visiting fellowships at the international universities, including Yale, New York University, Rutgers, the Five College Women's Studies Research Center in the US. So may I call upon Professor Neloufer from Sri Lanka.
Thank you very much, sir, for that introduction. Vice-Chancellor, Quaid-i-Azam University, Asma Jahangir, Chief Guest, Honorable Member of the National Assembly, and Dr. Farzana Bari. I first want to say how deeply grateful I am to the Center for Excellence in Gender Studies of Quaid-i-Azam University for inviting me to come here. It's been a while since I was last in Pakistan, and it's so good to be back to reconnect with friends that I've known for a long time, but also very especially to watch a younger generation take on the mantle and also meet the younger faculty members of the of Excellence for Gender Studies at Quaid-i-Azam University. It's really been an honor to meet the new people and reconnect with the old. We've had 2 excellent days of discussion. The papers have been deep, provocative, and I'm also very grateful to the organizers for scheduling it in a way that we really had the time to think with and through the authors and their papers and to ask questions. So thank you for that. In a recent publication entitled Gems, a Feminist Manifesto for the Study of Capitalism, its authors, Laura Baer, Karen Ho, Anna Singh, and Sylvia Yanagisako, playfully pun on the word gens, a word from ancient Rome that signifies aristocratic lineage. It was then transformed in the hands of the American anthropologist Lewis Henry Morgan in the 19th century in his study of kinship patterns to signify the original matriarchal genesis of a community. Engels then modifies Morgan's take by noting that the patriarchal form of gens led to the end of the matriarchal system. As the authors of the Feminist Manifesto note, we rarely think of this history, of the etymology root of gens today. This is particularly so even when we talk of gender, which, as we have discussed these past 2 days, is used not only by governments and developmental actors as a synonym for women, but even by many of us. And I'm really thankful to G here for requesting us to complicate how we use this term, gens and gender, from within a trans position. In fact, he's called not to define it at all. And this would be really within the irony of the term's root, because it signifies a history of contradictions between male authority and female kinship ties. This irony is not lost on the authors of the Feminist Manifesto. From this instability, they derive a jouissance, a kind of pleasure to say that, and I quote, gens is a capacious and flexible term that references our interest in the generative powers of capitalism, which is their particular project, and the inequalities it creates. In this sense, they state, we are particularly fond of the generative aspect of the term that is centrally concerned with means and mechanisms, or the very process of regeneration through which systems and socialities are made. For these authors, the gens approach is a strategy to reveal the constructedness and the messiness and the hard work involved in making, translating, converting, and linking diverse capitalist projects that enables capital to appear totalizing and coherent. As against this apparent monolithic hegemony, the Feminist Manifesto sets out to uncover what is unstable and contingent about capitalism in diverse life projects. It thereby signals an important emphasis on looking at the full range of productive power and practices through which people constitute diverse livelihoods. In the South Asian context, this would include the scholarship on women's land ownership, matrilineal inheritance patterns, common ownership of community resources, including natural ones, and resistance to global capital, etc. I begin my address to you citing a play on the term gens by a group of women writing a Feminist Manifesto, because there has already been much discussion at this conference on the term gender, how it is deployed by donors and governments, and whether it is useful to recover women as a category within this term or not. We have also had discussions on gender and development, and of contestations over the term empowerment, and the lack of a transformative feminist charge, whether in developmental drives, state reform processes, cultural production, or religious movements in Pakistan today. But what exactly do we mean when we say we want feminism back on the agenda? As already flagged through questions from the floor, who is this we? The tensions amongst feminists and women's groups noted here point to the fact that the we constitute diverse range of positions, occupy a diverse range of positions, even as there are those who deploy feminist goals and strategies who disavow the term altogether. Discussions at this conference have taken different routes to explain and theorize these tensions. And it is precisely because these tensions reflect sites and formations of power, either in the case of development, faith, and culture, enjoying the backing of international development agencies and our own states, or because they attract large numbers that form a critical mass, or incite real and often violent passion over issues of authority and authenticity and appropriateness, that they are more powerful, or it appears to us that they are more powerful than groups that are avowedly feminist, leftist, secular, anti-nationalist, and so on. This makes the feminist, as Nivedita Menon writes in her book Seeing Like a Feminist, feel always at the margins, in a, quote, relatively powerless position with reference to every dominant framework that swallows up the space and the center, unquote. This also gestures to an epistemic community that comes together, as Maitri Vikramasinghe points out in her book on meaning making within feminist research methodology, under a paradigm which she describes as a theoretically derived worldview which provides categories and concepts and becomes a covert reference point that binds us together. It is a place that, to quote Vikramasinghe again, takes up itself the authority to speak for and from a specialized knowledge base. This is what all of us have been doing these last 2 days, although not without contestation. We have been charged on the grounds of elitism, speaking from within the corridors of power in academia, etc. And it is precisely because this conference has given us a safe and shared space to do so, an assembly point for discussing the assemblages of interconnected knowledge, discourse, standpoints, and practice, that such meetings always paradoxically reinforce an affect of the margin, of being in encircled spaces of the kind Nivedita wrote about, that are nevertheless also sites of privilege and authority. This is a tension we often live with. And here at this conference, these tensions have been flagged in the discussions on center periphery, within women's movements themselves, the exclusionary pockets that take place in our own conversations. And it was conversely very interestingly flagged by G, who said that LGBTI discussions would not have radical potential in a space such as this, precisely because this is a margin that is also safe. So therefore we occupy in this room a site which we feel, which has an affect of the margins, but which is also safe, but is also home to institutional privilege, whether of nationality, class, ethnicity, caste, profession, and so on and so forth. It holds in and out groups, we know that. So therefore, as Graham Huggan writes, drawing on post-colonial feminist studies, there is a need to emphasize a feminist cartography which disassociates itself from the over-signifying spaces of patriarchal representation and produces an alternative map, characterized not by the containment or regimentation of space, but by a series of what he calls centrifugal displacements, or rhizomatic maps. A rhizomatic map, following Deleuze and Guattari, would acknowledge a series of intermingled lines of connection that shape shifting patterns of de- and re-territorialization. Listening to the paper by Fatma and Saad last afternoon, their motive of the hinge, and working out a theory of the binary and the borders of those binaries from within a particular discourse of Sufism resonates, I think, with this idea of entanglements and lines of connection. And Nazish spoke about it this morning as visitations. To go back to Maitri Vikramasinghe, these connections pose a challenge to our tendency sometimes to call feminist research and knowledge production the only genuinely political one, to call gender activism as underwritten only by the profit of capital, and research on women as being somehow neutral because it is within a compensatory and aspirational model of equality. As Vikramasinghe notes, the inclination towards such separation misleads, because there are shared aims and assimilations of feminisms, gender, and women in both local and global research knowledge, production, and practice. My talk today addresses these issues through three examples from Sri Lanka. And perhaps this is